right.
Welcome, everybody. I'm joined today by my friend Michael Shpizner. And you may remember Michael and I did a video together last summer where we discussed Michael's thought process that he developed. And it's a thought process algorithm that uses a unique mnemonic called WTF-WOW. And I will put a link to that video where Michael and I discussed his thought process algorithm. And what we wanted to do today was play a game against a bot on lead chess, a Maya bot, and discuss the algorithm as we make our moves and use that to guide us. So how are you doing, Michael?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. So what we thought we would do is we would play Maya 5 on lead chess, which is an AI bot which was trained on players roughly in the 1500 range on lead chess.
And I've
So
noticed, by the way, that recently Maya has increased her rating. When she was first created, I think my like 3 or 4 years ago, maybe more, she was at 1500 because she was trained in a database consisting entirely of games that were played between Lichess users at the 1500 level. So they went to the database and found games that were between people pretty closely rated, right around 1500, and that's where she was playing. But interestingly, she seems to have improved somewhat since she was created, and now her rating shows up as 1600.
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what we did is we just made our first moves here, just so we could have it set up when we started recording our session. And so we played E4 and Maya played E5. So we'll start your thought process algorithm, I suppose, at this point, huh, Michael?
Yeah.
Um,
So normally obviously, I don't spend a whole lot of time in the opening book moves, but just for the sake of, consistency and completeness, we might as well go through it even right now. So she just played E5, and the first question in the algorithm is, what weaknesses did that create on the opponent's side of the board? So not a whole lot to say other than when you move a pawn forward, you're no longer covering the two squares that it used to cover. When you move a pawn two squares forward, you're now not covering four squares that you could otherwise cover. So now she has kind of abandoned that pawn's coverage of d6, d5, f6, and f5. And in return, she's now covering d4 and f4. Um, so that's really all I would say about any weaknesses, quote unquote. It's not really a weakness, but just something to keep in mind.
yep. And so I highlighted those squares on the board as you were describing it. And I guess the only
Oh,
other thing I would add is that the H4 to D8 diagonal has been opened up as well with that
right.
move.
Yep, as well as the F8 to A3.
Yep.
The next step in the algorithm is threats. What threats does she create? And I think it's fair to say there's no actual threat here too early in the game. As you say, there's two diagonals that have opened up, so we want to be aware of a possible threat in the future. But I don't see any threats at this point.
And then I guess, that's the W, the weaknesses, the T is the threats. And then the F is if we have any forcing moves that would improve our position.
Right. And I think it's too early to say. Uh, I don't I don't see any forcing move. There's no check on the board. There's no capture on the board. And I don't really think there's any great forcing thing we can do. I guess the most forcing thing we could do would be to play d4 or f4, and then we'd be attacking an unprotected pawn.
Yep.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend either move, but those are the only things that could even possibly count as forcing moves, I think.
And you're a Scotch Gambit player, correct?
Yeah, lately.
Okay. So Yeah, so then I guess we we don't really need to go through candidate moves because you know what you want to play here. But
Right,
what we would do is we would go through the wow part of the algorithm, and maybe we should go through that even though it's the first move.
right, sure. So the move would be knight to f3. And the wow question, the first W of the wow, is just like the very first W in the at the very start when we're looking at the opponent's move. We ask the same question about our own move. What weaknesses, if any, does that create in our position? Um, and I guess the only thing I would say three things. I guess right now, when the knight is still on G1, it's hitting E2 and it's also hitting A3. So it's going to abandon the coverage of those two squares. I don't think that's particularly relevant or interesting at this stage of the game, but that would be the thought process. The other thing I would mention is when we move the knight to f3, we're blocking the queen's access to g4 and h5. Again, not particularly relevant at this stage of the game, but just to get our heads rolling in the direction of the algorithm. Those are the things I would notice.
Yep. And then the last W of the wow is if we made our intended move, would we get whacked, right?
Right. But one other thing before we skip over the O. So there's that O step, which I think I pretty much covered when I mentioned the queen. O is how would that move, if I played that move, how would it affect other pieces? O, both on my side of the board and on the opponent's side of the board. So as I mentioned, it would restrict our queen a little bit, not particularly relevant right now, but it would. And the other way it would affect other pieces is it would attack the undefended pawn on e5. Um, those, I guess, one other way it affects other pieces is it blocks our f pawn, which might be relevant at some point in some variations. We might want to play f4, but um, if we play knight to f3, we won't be able to do that, at least not for a while.
All
And then
right.
the final W that you were alluding to, could we get whacked? I would say no, we couldn't. There's no way that the knight would be defended twice on f3, and it's not even attacked once. There's no attacker in sight. I don't see any particular trouble.
All right. So I agree. So we went through our algorithm and then we'll make our move. And
Oh, that was
Maya
quick.
played knight c6.
Maya's ready for us, which is great. I'm glad she played that because that plays right into our hands of playing the Scotch game. But also, I just have to mention for people who may not have seen our first video, please understand we're taking a lot of time to go through every step of the algorithm very deliberately. In the real world, during a real game, you would never spend this much time. Certainly not on first couple of moves, and probably not ever. If the real point of the algorithm is that ideally it will become second nature eventually, that you won't even have to, step by step go through this algorithm. And I think that's what great players do. Magnus Carlsen doesn't go through any algorithm like this when he plays, but I'm sure in his thought process, he does cover these things. It's just that it's completely natural, spontaneous, and immediate for him. For me, it's not. And so I figure with enough practice, it will eventually become a little more natural and quick. But I just wanted to throw that out there for people who are getting really frustrated with how much time we're taking.
Yep. But it's important that we go through it for people to understand the process because ideally you do it on every move, even though in some cases it'll be like literally microseconds for some of the steps, because when there's no weaknesses created or no threats, such as this move here, knight to c6.
Right.
You know, we do the first W. What weaknesses does that create for the opponent's position? The only thing I'm noticing is that it blocks the c pawn.
Yep. Yep. It blocks the c pawn just like we blocked our f pawn. And the difference there, I would say, is that there are some pretty obvious disadvantages of moving the f pawn, right? We've all heard, or some of us have heard, Ben Feingold say it's a sin, a chess sin, to ever move the f pawn. But whether it's a sin or not, when you move the f pawn for white, you're opening up that dark square diagonal against your king. And if you castled on that side, you're opening up the other dark square diagonal against your king. Whereas on black's move, knight to c6, blocking the c pawn, there really might well be more cause to move the c pawn for black than there would have been to move the f pawn. So that's just my way of trying to say that is a meaningful weakness, I think, when you block the c pawn for black. And the other two squares that the knight is no longer guarding, just to note, is d7 and a6. Neither of which are particularly relevant right now, but they could become relevant later, I suppose.
Yep.
All right, so in this position, there are so many ways to proceed. That this is the first few moves towards the Italian game, the Spanish game. But for the Scotch game, we would play d4 in this position.
And do you want to like skip the thought process until we leave what we know as theory?
Yeah, I think we've demonstrated enough how it works, so we can kind of leave it out.
And then the first move where we're unsure, where we leave what you have memorized or know, as
Right.
theory,
Right.
then we'll slow down and go through the process.
Right, but I've played d4 in this position enough times, and I know that Paul Morphy loves the Scotch game. So if it's good enough for Paul Morphy, it's good enough for me.
All right, we will play it.
All right, so she captured. And the most common move here, of course, would be to recapture with the knight. The knight would be defended by the queen, and we would equalize the material. Because right at this moment, Maia is up a pawn.
So
now, the Scotch gambit is when you let that pawn be, and you move your bishop to c4. And what it does is, it's like so many gambits in the opening, you're trading off a pawn's worth of material for activity. And that bishop is hitting the f7 pawn. Our knight can come to g5 and hit that f7 pawn a second time. So there's lots of active, possibilities once you get that bishop out to c4, sorry. And we'll probably end up picking up that pawn on d4 eventually anyway.
All right, so bishop c4.
Let's do it.
Knight f6.
All right, so we can go through the same, what are the weaknesses, pretty much similar to what we've talked about. The main thing I want to focus on right here is what are the threats. So that would be the second step in the algorithm, WTF. This is the T. What threats does that pose for us? And there's a pretty obvious threat on e4. We probably don't want to lose a second pawn for no good reason. However, one way to respond to this, I think, and Brock helped me out here. You referred to me as a Scotch Gambit player. I've played it maybe 3 times in my life. I'm trying to learn it, and I've seen this position a number of times. And one interesting approach is to castle short right here. That way, if Maya decides to take that pawn, we slide our rook over to e1. That knight is pinned, and even though she could bring her f pawn, well, I guess f pawn or d pawn to defend the knight, if once we get our knight out of the way, we can hit that knight with f3, and I don't think there'd be any way to save that knight. So
Okay,
we
yeah,
would end
I
up.
don't know the theory. I have never. Well, I shouldn't say never, but I have played the Scotch, but not the Scotch Gambit. So I don't know the theory at all, and so um,
Now there are a couple of other interesting ways to respond here. One of them is to push e5.
right, that's the one I'm familiar with. This dark square strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know the theory or anything.
Now the problem with that is there are a couple of ways that she could attack that pawn a second time. It's only defended once by our knight on f3. So, for example, she could move her knight to g4. Now both knights are hitting our pawn. We could defend it again with the queen on e2, for example. And that might be perfectly safe. I don't know.
Yeah. So let's think. Here's a question for you. If so what we're doing is we're looking at candidate moves first, I guess, right? Because we've kind of decided, you know, on our algorithm, is there any forcing moves that would improve our position? And I guess, you know, e5, the move that we're considering, is kind of a forcing move, isn't it?
Yep, that
Because
would be a
it's
forcing
attacking
move.
the knight on f6.
Another one would be bishop to g5, right? Pinning the knight to the queen.
Correct.
But it seems easy enough for her to unpin either bishop to e7 or pawn to h6.
So I guess another question then, so we've got two candidate moves. We've
Right.
already kind of said that bishop to g5, kind of bishop to e7 solves a lot of the problems and kind of renews the threat on e4.
Yeah.
The idea with e5 and what weaknesses, you know, we would kind of look at the weaknesses of that move. So I guess
There is one other candidate move I'd throw in the mix, and that would be queen to e2.
yep. And you
And
said castling.
right. And just to think through that queen to e2 move for a minute, if we were to do that, could we get whacked? And we could with if she moves d3, but I don't think that's a meaningful threat because we can just take it either with the bishop or with the pawn or with the queen, actually. Yeah, that would be an undefended pawn, so we could just capture it any one of three ways. So I don't think we have to worry about d3, but I'm always a little nervous about putting my queen and king in line with each other. She's a step away from castling, and once she castles, if she puts a rook on e8, that could be trouble. Although we can castle next move. Anyway, all right, so bringing it down to candidate moves. So e5, bishop to g5, queen e2. Did we miss it? Oh, or castle. Or castle.
Castle.
So wow, that's 4 candidate moves.
Right. So we should look at the most forcing one first, I think,
Good plan.
which is e5.
Yeah.
Because if it's, like we know this is probably theory here, but if you're in a game with the clock ticking, you want to look at the most forcing ones first, because if it works, it works, and then you
Right.
don't have your time running down while you're just deciding the other candidate moves. Because if it's a winning move and you're not don't have an overabundance of time in that situation in the game, you can just play the
Yeah.
move. So
Yeah. No,
probably
I
just
think.
for habit, we might want to look at e5 first.
Hmm. And
And
so
so,
what we want to do is analyze or calculate a couple moves deep, so or at least a few ply deep. So e5, if I'm Maya, I've got to move the knight, or the alternative, an alternative, would be queen to e7. So that pins the knight. I'm sorry, pins the pawn, so I can't take the knight. And if we simply castle, um, then the pawn is undefended. It's defended once and attacked twice. I shouldn't say undefended. It's loose then. But then if we slide the rook to e1, that revives our threat on the knight, right?
yeah. And at what point in your algorithm, Michael, do you look at the wow part of it as you're doing the candidate moves, or just once you decide on what is the most promising candidate move? So would
Ideally, that's a great question, Brock. Ideally, you would do it for each candidate move that you're considering. You do want to look at how it would affect other pieces at the O and what weaknesses it would create, because that'll help you to calculate whether that candidate might, you might just eliminate a candidate move entirely with the first W. Oops, that creates a great weakness, or it opens me up to attack or something. So that's not a good candidate. So yeah, you should do it each move, I think. Um,
so if
hmm.
for e5, I guess what weaknesses would it create for our position? So mostly it's just taking control of f5 and d5 away from us, right? And one could
By the way,
argue,
let me interrupt, Brock. We left out another intriguing candidate move. I think we already have 4. Here's a 5th. Knight to g5. It brings another defender to e4, and it threatens f7.
mhm,
And because she's moved her knight, normally one way to defend f7 would have been to move her knight from g8 to h6. But she doesn't have that option here. So let's just talk that through for a minute. If we were to play knight to g5 right here, she can't take the pawn. We'll just take the knight. Although now we're the ones. No, that's okay. We could just take the knight. And if she brings a queen to pin the knight, we can bring our queen to e2 unpinned. So we win a knight for a pawn that way. So she won't take the pawn. Not sure what she would do. How does she defend against either knight or bishop takes f7? I think the answer is the other knight goes to e5.
or I would think possibly d5.
Oh, interesting.
D5 would be the first move I would look at for black,
Right,
because then
right. Yeah,
it's
it's kind of a fried liver attack situation. Oh, yeah. Huh. Gets complicated, doesn't it? Pretty quick.
Right.
Oh, the other candidate move we didn't consider is knight b to d2. That's another way to defend e4.
Hmm. And that would probably be
Oh my
one we would
God.
want to, using your algorithm a bit, it would be probably one we would want to look at towards the end because it does have the weakness of blocking in our dark squared bishop.
Right.
So if any of the active
That,
moves, when we play a gambit, when we're trying to play actively, that would be kind of towards the bottom of our candidate choices.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Ah, all
So
right. So,
so knight g5, um, and do you see any solution to d5?
well, e takes d5 solves our problem of the undefended or underdefended pawn or undefended pawn on e4. So she would presumably take back with her knight, and now it's our move, and we get to make a developing move. So we're going to have three pieces out, and she'll only have two, and she'll have a pawn that's hanging on d4. Does that all make sense?
Okay,
So
so knight.
here's the variation I'm talking about. It will be knight to g5, then d5 in response. E takes d5, knight takes d5, and then we get a free move, probably opening up or bringing out our dark square bishop. Now my my visualization skills are, shall we say, under construction, so I may have missed something.
Yeah, I don't think you missed anything. Um, I just feel like
One question would be,
I just feel like we've lost all the kind of the steam in the position because if we can't get the knight off of d5, then we don't have our bishop working on f7, and black can do things like if we spend a tempo, black can do things like queen e7 with check. So I don't think we missed anything like material or anything, but the impression I get is that the d5 kind of slows down our initiative.
yeah, it does seem to. And it also leaves open what would be a good square for our bishop, our dark square bishop, because we no longer have f4. His knight ends up on d5, right?
Right.
And we don't have e3 because the pawn is there. So the bishop, dark square bishop, would probably just have to go to d7, or we could consider a fianchetto. Hmm. Ah. So what do we think about e5? I mean, I guess we haven't eliminated it, right? It's safe, right?
Right. So I kind of see that as more okay, like if we play e5
Mm-hmm.
and then the initial thing we were worried about, um, and we kind of talked about the weakness, the potential weaknesses. The other effect on our other pieces is it kind of takes that square away from the knight. The knight can't go to e5 then,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't block in any of our other attacking pieces.
Right.
And we thought the most active move for black you mentioned knight g4.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, what about knight g5 in that position?
Whoa.
See, I don't know any of this theory at all, and I kind of one of the issues with these king pawn openings is they're very concrete, and a lot of times it's like
You either know it or you
calculation and
don't.
knowing, well, just knowing the lines, kind of. But like so e5, knight g4, knight g5, hitting f7, and unveiling an attack on the knight with the queen. So the queen would be hitting the knight on g4, and we're hitting the f7 square at the same time. Could be.
And then the move we looked at before for black, d5, solves both of those problems, right? It opens up the bishop to defend her knight on g4, and it blocks our bishop.
Right. So, but I think so. The question is if we played e5, knight g4, knight g5, if they played d5 there, we can take en passant.
Oh, look at that.
And then
All right.
the question is does queen to e7 there? Does that kind of protect everything?
Interesting. e5, knight to g4, knight to g5, knight on c6 takes e5. I think we just lost a pawn there. And our bishop is under attack.
Right. So we probably don't play knight g5 after knight g4.
Right.
It's a bit early to think we can do stuff like that, I think. Because black hasn't made any mistakes.
Why doesn't the following work? e5, knight g4, bishop takes f7 check. Assuming the king captures the bishop, now knight to g5 check, hitting the knight on g4, because she hasn't moved that bishop, that pawn on the d pawn yet. So the light squared bishop isn't defending the knight on g4. Is there any chance that works? It seems like it shouldn't work, because like you said, black hasn't made any mistakes yet. But why wouldn't that work? Why don't we at least win a pawn? So let's start with e5. What would she do?
Well, we were first looking at knight g4.
Yeah, but I think we just refuted that. Let's try one more time, see where the holes are. e5, knight g4, bishop takes f7, check. King takes f7, knight to g5, check. King moves somewhere. Queen takes g4. So we just won a pawn. Well, we won a pawn, but we traded a bishop for a knight. And
we dislocated the king.
Dislocated the king, wrecked the kingside pawn structure.
But the other thing is we don't have to take with the bishop with check. We can also take with the knight on f7.
Right.
So I agree. They can't play knight g4. So what would they do then?
So we start with e5, knight to g4.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Bishop takes f7 check, king takes f7, knight to g5 check. King moves somewhere. Let's just say g6. We take the knight with our queen. Queen takes g4. Now she moves her pawn, and we move our queen out of the way. You want to try it and see what happens?
Sure.
All right, let's do
So
it.
the question is then, I guess
But are
we
we
kind of
really
got
brave enough?
sidetracked, huh?
Are we really brave enough to play bishop takes f7?
Well, I think like I think you always should. If you can't figure out what's wrong with it, you play it, and if not, we learn a lesson. That's how I kind of approach it. Like I don't trust. I know we're playing a bot, but like if I'm playing a human, but like if we got a like let's say an analogous position to this in complexity or whatever in the middle of the game, and I see a move and I can't find the response for black that works, then I'm just going to play it and I'm going to make them prove it. And if I missed it, I missed it.
Yeah.
And if we miss it, then we learn a new position and we learn something for us to work on to figure out in our thought process what did we miss, or could we have approached it differently.
It's all about learning at this stage, so let's try it. Oh, she did it. Oh my God. Calling our bluff. All right, are we brave enough? Let's calculate it one more time now that it's actually on the board. Should be easier to calculate now. Bishop takes f7 check. King takes f7. Knight to g5 check, hitting the knight on g4. King goes somewhere. And then we take the knight on g4. What's the worst that could happen?
It's a good way of looking at it.
All right, I'm game if you are. Oh, all right, we got to do the knight to g5 now, right? Is there any alternative?
Well, we got the king on the run.
We sure do.
In the interest of time, should we do it and then,
or
do you want to go through the thought process? I guess.
Yeah. I mean, there are very few options here, right? After we move knight to g5, well, let's use the algorithm. When she moved the king,
she'll probably move to g8, probably.
Yeah, that's probably what I would do if I were a bot. Just to get out of trouble, right?
Right. But if she goes to g6, we looked at g6, we take on g5. And then we're also threatening like some kind of discovery with our knight. We'd be threatening knight to e6 check and winning the queen if she didn't do something.
Right. By the way, one thing we need to keep in mind, once we move our knight away from f3, what are the effects on other pieces, the O step? Well, it's no longer attacking the pawn on d4. So right now, that pawn on d4 is attacked twice and defended once.
But it also has the effect of opening the queen on the knight.
Yeah.
And the other thing it does is it takes our protection off of e5.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we do want to play knight to g5 check, right?
Because we calculated that we can't see how it gets whacked.
Right.
It might get whacked, but all we can do is, I guess we would look at forcing moves. There's no checks in the position. There's no captures other than queen takes knight.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's also, well, she'll be in check, so we don't have to worry too much.
Right.
But she's really going to have to move the king or lose her queen to our bishop. So I think at this stage, keep in mind, not only are we no longer attacking d4, but e5 is now going to be loose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's I guess that's one thing we're kind of obliged now, but but I mean we do have to look at knight takes e5. Um,
Which would also hit our queen.
right. And then I will probably take on d4 probably.
Well, I think it's too late to back down
There's
now,
no
right?
going back, so we'll do it. Agreed?
Okay. Yeah. As you predicted, very good. Well, we have to take the knight.
Yep.
And by the way, if she does take our pawn on e5, we get the pawn on d4. With, by the way, ooh, there's almost a mating threat. If we take the pawn on d4 with our queen, wouldn't,
I think what we do is
but look at the next move, d5, queen to d5 or queen to c4, check.
so I think if they do, I guess we shouldn't be looking too far ahead at this point, but we also should consider queen f5 if they play knight e5, where we double attack the knight on e5 and the mating square on f7, and it may not work because the knight covers f7, but it's worth considering when we get there. I don't think it works actually. So we'll take it, right?
Yeah, we got to take the knight.
All right, so this is what we thought.
And why doesn't, all right, so let's say we take the pawn, queen takes d4.
So should we go through the algorithm here?
Yeah, we better. So she just moved her knight from c6 to e5 to take that pawn.
Yeah.
What weaknesses did that create? Well, it leaves her d4 pawn hanging. That's a very significant weakness, I think. Because, check this out, maybe I'm wrong here, but if we take the pawn on d4, don't we have a triple threat? We would be attacking the unprotected knight on e5. We'd also be threatening, I think, checkmate on d5 and also checkmate on c4, no?
On d5, yep.
And also d5 and c4, yeah.
Yep. But his knight covers c4, but yeah, it would be if his knight moved.
No. Oh, then I covered it. I got you. Right. I see. So if Maya is smart, no, but then she's not protecting the knight. I get it. Wouldn't she have to move her queen to e7? That defends the knight and the mating threat. And
it hits our
king by X-ray, so we're going to have to probably castle at that point. But I like it. I mean, what's the disadvantage? If we just play queen takes d4 here, can we get whacked?
Correct. That's the way to think about it.
Yeah, and I don't see it.
So the only weakness we're creating is we're taking one defender off the knight on g5, right? But still defended by the bishop on c1.
That's right.
And the other good thing that it does do is it covers b4 for checks from the black's dark squared bishop. See, with that pawn on
Now
d6, normally that we wouldn't care because we'd just interpose, and it probably isn't an issue anyway, but that's like a nice little bonus kicker.
I get it. Yeah, that's very nice. Very nice. And by the way, I was saying that she would have to move queen to e7, and that hits our king. But we can play a developing move with bishop to e3 at that point. Now our king is protected.
Or we castle to threaten
Or we
rook
just
e1.
castle at that point. Yeah. Anyway, either way, but I think queen takes d4 is
It's
safe.
good. I don't think it gets whacked.
How are all the ways it could possibly get whacked?
I guess
Yeah,
we
that's
should look
always
at the knight to f3 check. I don't think that amounts to anything.
right. Knight f3 check is nothing because our knight can just take it. The knight to d3 check, similarly, just pawn can take it. Can the queen get whacked? Well, bishop to c5 would hit the queen, but that's not a safe square.
Yeah,
Pawn
because
to
then we would have queen d5 mate.
right. And by the way, is that mate? I can't see how it isn't, but it seems to.
Yeah, it's mate. It's mate in two. They'll play knight f7, and then we just take queen takes knight. It's just like a smothered mate.
Yeah, interesting mate.
Huh? Maybe it's cool that we played e4. E4.
All right. Well, I think there's no reason. Oh, here's the other way that she could hit the queen is with c5, but then queen to d5 wins the game. So I think queen takes d4 is safe and creates a couple of nice threats. So I say let's do it. What?
All right, this looks kind of juicy.
Now wait a minute. Oh, no. I think didn't we just win this game? Queen to d5 check.
Yeah.
Bishop to e6, I think, is the only legal move, and we just take that bishop to the queen.
Yep.
Whoa!
This is going to be a 11 move miniature.
Which is great because it took us an hour. I think that's the move.
Is that the way to do it? We got to spend an hour on our first 10 moves, and we'll win all the games.
And we create a miniature. I love it. That's how strong the algorithm is, Brock.
I think we should go through the algorithm. You're right, your algorithm, not the computer's algorithm.
So
I guess we should
now before
go
you
through the algorithm one last time for the people learn the algorithm. But
one of the things I've been hearing about lately in videos and stuff is weaker players will play the last move really quickly. Stronger players will spend most of their time on a move like this. In other words, if we have an hour, not most of their time, but we have an hour left on the clock, if this were a real game, we wouldn't just play d5. We would try to come up with every possible way that white could refute it. But so let's just take it one step at a time. Queen to d5 check. It seems to me there's only one legal move, bishop to e6. Is that wrong?
Well, knight to f7, and that would be queen takes knight mate.
That's right. Thank you. Yep, would be another move. or bishop to e6, and we take that with mate.
Yep.
Oh no, actually, oh, you're right. They can do both. So it's actually mate in 3 here,
Yep,
isn't it?
mate in 3.
So it's queen to d5 check, bishop to e6, queen takes e6, knight to f7, queen takes f7, mate. Whoa! This is a nice puzzle too, isn't it?
Yeah.
If we had gone back like a move or two, although I think her last move, d6 was just a blunder, right?
Yeah, d6 was just a blunder.
What should she have done? Yeah, I
Well,
think
what we should do is we probably have time if you want. We can finish her off, and then I can load it into a study real fast, and we can just go through it and see if we missed anything. It seems
let's
too
do
good to
that.
be true that we could just. I mean, I guess the knight g4. I guess I don't know if they're supposed to play the knight back to g8. I mean, I don't know the theory. So,
Yeah,
and my
yeah.
memory is terrible, and that's why I don't play e5 or e4.
Yeah, because
But
there's so much to keep in mind. All right, let's
yeah,
play it
because
and
we undoubtedly
make sure.
probably missed something, right? But it would be fun to see. So
Yeah,
let's
definitely.
mate her up, and then I'll
All
pause
right,
and get a study loaded up real quick,
great.
and
All
we can
right, so
throw
let's
it
do
in
queen
there.
to d5,
Yep.
and I
So then
predict
we just
bishop to
so it's a
e6.
forcing move, and it definitely improves our position.
Yeah.
See, we don't have to get past the F part of the algorithm here.
Yep.
So a forcing move, queen d5. Then we would look at the weaknesses, their other pieces, but more importantly, because it's a forced mate, that we think we just need to see if it can get whacked.
Right, right, right. And the only and it
So
can get back.
bishop to e6 would be a whack attempt,
Yep,
and we just take it.
yep. And it's the only whack attempt on the board.
Yep, because they're in check, so they have to
And
respond.
and most importantly, because their queen is on a dark square.
Yep,
If their queen had been on a light square, they could just interpose, or not interpose, but they could defend um, the knight on f7. Is what I meant to say. You see what I mean?
yep.
If the queen were on either d7 or e8, we wouldn't have a mate.
Well, let's mate them up.
Let's mate them up. Yeah, as expected. All right. Wait
And we
before you
take
do
it.
it, before you pull the trigger. If we take, yeah,
Look at that,
okay,
it's beautiful.
smothered mate, baby. Yeah.
All right.
All right. So let's
12
pause
mover.
the video here. Pause the
Is that
recording.
like an accelerated miniature, or what's the term for that, I wonder? I'm gonna get this loaded into a study, okay?
All right.
I'm gonna pause the recording here.
Right.
All right, so we're back. We have a study set up in the analysis mode, so we'll take a look at it and we'll just see if we missed anything. So
And let's keep the engine off and
okay,
go through it one time quickly just to see if we missed anything that we can recognize. And
sure.
then let's go back to the beginning and turn the engine on. What do you say? All right.
Yep, that sounds good.
All right. So we played e4, e5. We can whiz through these opening moves. So the first thing that's out of book a little bit is this move here, the bishop to c4, because that's the Scotch gambit instead of the Scotch game. All right, she's just playing the old two knights defense. And we made either the killer move or the sucker move. We'll find out soon enough. e5. And she played knight to g4, pretty much as we expected. Next comes our other sucker / brilliant move. All right, check. King takes, knight takes, discovering an attack on the g4 knight. King tucks herself back in the corner. We take that knight. She takes our pawn, which probably was a mistake, right? If we were playing for black, I think at this point, we would play d6, right? Do you agree?
Yeah.
Or even d7. I'm sorry, not d7. Either
D5
d6
or
or
D6, I'm
d5.
not sure.
Yeah,
Probably D6.
yeah, because then we're attacking the pawn twice
And the
on
queen.
e5. Yeah, and of course we're attacking the queen as soon as we do that. So she took the pawn and didn't take advantage of the opportunity to attack our queen. Okay. Well, I mean, she's attacking it that way, but and this is actually really interesting, Brock, in terms of the algorithm.
Uh-huh.
If Maya had been using the algorithm, she would have thought to herself, there are two ways in this position that I can attack the queen. One is by moving my d pawn, and the other is by moving my knight and capturing the e5 pawn.
Yeah.
But the disadvantage of using the knight is that it undefends d4.
She also would have considered bishop to b4.
Right, right. Although I don't think that would really get her very far, because bishop to b4, then we play c3. If she wants to take, that's fine. We'll take back with the knight, and we get a free developing move. Now she can double up our pawns and stuff. Actually, maybe that wasn't as bad as I thought for her.
Well, the one thing it does do is, I mean, it's not really, I guess it's probably concretely it doesn't work, but it does create extra space for her king on f8, but
Yeah,
concretely I don't think it matters, but in your algorithm she would consider it at least.
Right, for sure.
Because once in a while maybe there's something there, right? Like,
yeah. All right, anyway, back to the game. So she did take, and we went through our algorithms and saw that there was a weakness in that move. That's the first W in the algorithm, that she left her d4 pawn undefended. So we looked at taking it with the queen. We asked ourselves, could we get whacked? We didn't see anything particularly whackable in that position. So we did it. She moved d6, which I think is the losing move of the game. And we found queen d5 check. Or basically, in this position right here, we recognize that's a mate in 3. 1, 2, 3. And all 3 of those moves were forced.
yep.
Very cool.
Would you say that move there, queen d5, was a forcing move that improved our position?
I would say we didn't have to go beyond the second step in the algorithm. Yeah, it doesn't always work out quite that smoothly, but it's nice when it does. All right, let's go back to the beginning. Now, when we turn on the engine, it's going to be just local, right? So you won't be seeing exactly.
I won't see yours. Yeah, I'm not going to run it on my end because I don't want it to slow down my old computer. I can run it though. I can run it on the. I can let them run it. I'll do that.
I could share my screen if you want.
Oh no, I got it.
All right. So let me know when I should move.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
All right. So I'm just going to whip through the opening moves again. All right. So at this moment, it's perfectly equal, perfectly equal, perfectly equal. All right. All right. Still perfectly equal. Now, the best move, according to Stockfish, is to castle, but e5 is also the best move. The same evaluation. So e5 is the winner. Nice. Good on us. And now she has two options. She can play d5 or knight g4. And they're both the same evaluation. And she picked that one. But guess what? Bishop takes f7 is not the move. All right, so let's pause here and figure out why. We just took, Stockfish says, it's not a blunder, but it's an inaccuracy for sure. We just went from up 0.2 to down 0.9. So about a 1 pawn loss by making that move. So not the end of the world, but not good. And what we should have done was just castle. All right, let's figure out why this was so bad.
So there's some kind of defense for black.
I guess. So if this were against a human player, I think it would be great because like in this position right here, there's only two, well, it's pretty obvious in this case. All right.
So everything is pretty much forced.
Yeah, knight g5 check is the best move.
Up until king, let's see.
Now, there are three options. Two of them were okay, and one of them is particularly bad. So king to e7 would be bad. I wonder why. We would play queen takes g4. Well, we're going to do that anyway, aren't we? Oh, this is interesting. Check this out. When she plays the king back here, now we're up a pawn, but our move is not to take the queen.
Yeah, I see that. It's queen f3. I ran that computer analysis.
Wow.
So we're threatening mate.
Yeah, but it's so easy to defend, right? Can't you just move queen to here or queen to here?
It's not intuitive because to me it feels like we give them an extra tempo.
Not only that, but what if she takes the tempo to do this?
But then we got our mate with on.
Oh, now we can go back
D5.
here, right?
So I guess the point of it is to move to the mating net. Queen f3 is to bring d5 into. Interesting.
Oh, I see. Because if we took the knight the way we did, her best move, just a simple little h6.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, we did not consider that.
Hmm.
So that's like a forcing move. Kind of forcing.
So basically, at this point, we just have to move the knight away, and now our attack is gone, fizzled.
Interesting.
So really, the move that lost the game for her yeah, she's up almost 2 pawns in this position when we take the knight. Interesting. But she has to see h6. Blunder. And I must say, I think that was a pretty human move to play knight takes e5. You know,
right.
it's like
your eye is drawn towards that queen.
It really is. Plus, you're getting a free pawn. You're having the opportunity to pin, to line up a discovered attack on the king in the next move. So it looks so attractive. I think a lot of humans would have played that. But she did, and we were quick enough to recognize queen takes d4, best move. Whoa. So we thought this was like so winning. We're only up 0.2. Because...
Well, I don't know that we thought it was so winning. Because we didn't expect her to play d6. We thought she was going to do like queen to e7 or.
That's right. It only became winning after her next move. Right. That was, yeah, this was pretty crazy. She went from, or the evaluation went from plus zero point 0.2, basically exactly what the evaluation was on move one, right, to maiden 3.
But like, look at this position. If we go back one, like, I would have thought this was, the computer says plus 0.3.
Yeah.
Like, we were both happy to get to this position. I mean, this is amazing that this is only 0.3. Like, I would have thought we were at least 2 pawns ahead. Because, like, I mean, like, we got 2 pieces developed. We can castle.
Yeah.
Black has 1 piece that's under attack. They have to somehow untangle their rook on h8.
Their h8 rook is nowhere.
That's really amazing. But I see that's the issue with the computers, though, is it's kind of like a computer can play every best defensive move and figure out some kind of fortress or something, where like anybody we play is not going to be able to figure this out easily.
Right.
Because to me, this just looks brutal.
So this was just a total giveaway, and I'm proud of us for finding the 3-move mate. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to come back to the room now. So what did we learn?
Well, we should play e4.
That works.
Play e4, and then the games are shorter, and the algorithm will find more stuff.
I think the algorithm worked for us pretty much, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess one last question would be, because I know we were running up against time issues, but let's just look right here. Actually, right here. Remember how when we were looking at this, we'll have to check the tape to make sure I'm not hallucinating, but we did say, remember how we said, okay, well, we have this. If they take this, we take here, and we have this mate threat on d5. I'm pretty sure we saw that from this position here.
Yeah.
And so your algorithm kind of led us to an important square on d5.
Yeah.
Like we may have been able to use your algorithm to find queen f3, because at that point in one of the variations we looked at, d5 mate was on our radar. Remember how we noticed that?
Yeah.
Because we were thinking the knight would be here, we'd take here, and then we'd have this, knight would come back, and we'd mate him up on f7.
Yeah.
So the algorithm did point out that move to us in a roundabout way.
Right.
Put it on our radar screen. We forgot to use it. We kind of played the moves quickly. But it was there to be found.
Yeah.
And then we also saw, like, by her not using the algorithm,
how she took the pawn with her knight, abandoning her d4 pawn, and that's what gave us entree to d5 with our queen.
Yeah, good stuff.
Really nice. All right, very cool.
Well, I'll stop the recording here. So I just said to everybody, thanks for watching. Hope you found that fun and instructive. So I guess any closing thoughts, Michael? I guess part of it would be that you want to practice the algorithm so that it's, obviously we get a little off kilter when we're doing it together and we're trying to go through all the steps, but Michael's been practicing it, so when he plays it in his own games where he's just focused in, it's just kind of like bing, bing, bing. So
yeah, I have to confess that even though I have been practicing this for a few months now, maybe more, it's still very difficult for me to do it on every move.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes. It's got to be every move, because if it's a 40 move game and you only do it 98% of the time, that means you're going to not do it at least one move in a 40 move game. And that could be the move that costs you the game. You know, chess is such a unforgiving game or sport or whatever you want to call it. You have to be on your game, so to speak, every single move. And that's why chess is so exciting and dynamic and thrilling, but it's also why it's so difficult and frustrating sometimes. So I find that the algorithm helps me because it gives me kind of a something to lean on, like a like a crutch, I guess, something to lean on in the height of battle. But I have to remember that it's there.